Winston as Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 5, Chapter 13, The Battle of Tannenberg. Few men have written with more penetration on the Great War than Monsieur Jean de Pierrefeu. His task of drafting the official communiques of the French army during the whole struggle ensured him the fullest knowledge of what happened in France. His high intelligence and literary qualities used his knowledge in the most effective manner. But when he makes an excursion to the Russian front and attempts to describe the Battle of Tannenberg, he merely repeats in an attractive form some of the popular delusions which have gathered round that battle. His opening paragraphs illustrate at once the situation and his misconceptions of it. Ludendorff at grips with the Russians. Two Russian armies have invaded eastern Prussia. In the east that of Rennenkampf, a mass of 24 infantry divisions at more than full strength, preceded by a numerous cavalry. In the south that of Samsonov, less important but still alone superior to the sole defense of East Prussia. The 8th German Army. To face this double enemy it must be divided. But the march of Samsonov endangers the troops in front of Rennenkampf beyond the Masurian lakes. They run the risk of being ground between the two armies. Moreover, Moltke has contemplated a general retreat to the west on the line of the Vistula. A prudent solution indicated already by Schlieffen in his plan. However, Ludendorff, without hesitation, adopts the solution of audacity. At a glance, the position of the two Russian armies in eastern Prussia evokes in his staff officer mind, familiar with the themes of celebrated campaigns, the plan of a famous maneuver which so many great captains have used. It is the classical maneuver, to surprise successively two adversaries who are separated before their junction and beat them one after the other. In this case, to fall upon Samsonov with united strength, then to turn against Rennenkampf before the latter has time to go to the help of the former. Such is the plan of the campaign which is about to open. Point by point, events unfold exactly as Ludendorff has foreseen them. As Rennenkampf, marching slowly through eastern Prussia from east to west, reaches the line of the Masurian lakes, Ludendorff withdraws from before this sluggish enemy the bulk of the German forces confronting him. He joins these forces to the fraction of the 8th Army opposing Samsonov. He then attacks Samsonov and beats him. As above, all by a stroke of genius, he has directed two corps withdrawn from the Masurian lakes upon the rear of Samsonov's army. This army collides with them in full retreat, and disaster culminates in ruin. There is Tannenberg. Voila, Tannenberg. The reader, who is acquainted with the story of the Battle of Gumbinnen, with the times and circumstances of Ludendorff's appointment, and with the orders which he gave or did not give or found already given, will see at a glance the monstrous perversions of fact which underlie this springly and compendious narrative. That so shrewd and authoritative a commentator should 5 years after the armistice have given such a travesty to the world makes it a public duty to expose the truth. We will proceed to trace the real part which Ludendorff played in this tremendous battle. In so doing, we shall not deprive him of any credit which is his due as a brave and skilful officer faithfully bearing an immense responsibility. We shall strip him only of the legendary trappings which ignorant rumor has offered him, and which he has shown himself so eager to take and keep. While the affairs described in the last chapter have been unfolding on the German side, the Russian hosts have been toiling on. The tragic figure of Samsonov now flashes for its brief moment in the light of history. Cavalry leader in Manchuria, governor of Turkestan, on sick leave in the Crimean at the outbreak of war, Samsonov on August 8 arrives at Bialystok to command the 2nd, the southern Russian army. This army of more than 5 corps and 5 cavalry divisions is to march from the Białystok-Warsaw railway line northwest towards the Baltic. It will pass south of the chain of Masurian lakes and strike the Germans more or less in the direction of Allenstein, and by so doing will cut off in flank and rear every German soldier opposing the advance of the First Russian Army under Rennenkampf. Strategically, it was a deadly thrust. It might have been much more deadly. With that sorry wisdom that judges after the event, one may ask why the Russian strategic plan ever contemplated an advance of 2 separate armies, with all the advantages it gave to the Germans with their breakwater of lakes and fortifications and their network of railways. Why was it not open to Russia to have moved with one united army, advancing south of the lakes on a broader and stronger front? Could they not have afforded to leave the area between Kovno and the frontier untenanted? Indeed, to lure on the German forces into it? The one fatal punch to which the Germans were exposed by geography was a northwestward advance from the Warsaw-Białystok line towards the Vistula. Such a march intercepted all communications, traversed all railways, dislocated all prepared plans, swept out of existence all German schemes for wringing the changes from one flank to the other, wiped out a score of grave anxieties and obligations. It was a pincer attack in which all the available strength could be employed on one half of the pincers, the other being fixed naturally and forever by the sea. Moreover, the massing of the entire Russian forces on this southern line would eliminate the fortress of Königsberg as a factor in the operations. That powerful place, mysterious and formidable to an army advancing like Rennenkampf's with its right hand on the Baltic, would simply have ceased to count in a single-massed Russian advance from the southeast. It would have been left behind and cut off with whatever else the Germans might think fit to hold in the long and dangerous military promontory of East Prussia. No need to fight at Stallupönen and Gumbinen. No need to trouble about the lakes and the Lötzen fortress in their midst. But this simpler method had been deliberately prevented by the decisions or neglects of pre-war strategy. Only 2 lines of rail, both single, crossed the frontier, Białystok-Lück and Warsaw-Neidenburg. This sandy, trackless border had purposely been left roadless and desolate to guard against a German offensive. Now their own offensive war plans for a different situation had to be made within the limitations they had themselves created. They were condemned to improvisation and the second best. Nevertheless, with its great preponderance, the Russian offensive was sufficiently formidable, and we find Samsonov striding forward with his 5 corps in this same menacing direction in conjunction with Rennenkampf's advance and crossing the German-Polish frontier on a broad front continuously during the 21st and 22nd. Let us look at the condition of this new Russian army at the moment it begins its invasion of Germany. The 5 army corps of which it consists have been marching without rest for 8 or 9 days along sandy tracks in the burning heat of August. Zielinski, in his eagerness to intervene in the general war drama at the earliest moment, has set Samsonov's forces in movement before their transport arrangements have been completed. He has by repeated telegrams urged the weary columns forward. He has refused all appeals for a halt, and in consequence these 14 divisions, a mass of over 200,000 men, are now about to come into contact with their German foe, reduced by sickness and straggling, wearied by many severe marches, weakened from scanty rations through trying to live on a barren country, with their regimental reserves of food already heavily drawn upon, and their communications so unorganized that no supplies can reach them from the rear. We may picture these brave troops already hungry, worn, and footsore, their ardor checked by a leaden fatigue. Wandering forward through the broad landscape of somber pine forests, innumerable tawny lakes, infertile stubble fields with squalid hamlets, few and far between. They are about to encounter the best trained troops in the world, local men fighting on their native soil, soldiers whose kith and kin are flying for safety under their very eyes, with hearths and home at their backs, and with all the terrors of scientific war at their command. The Russians can hope to have on their side one advantage, and one advantage alone: overwhelming numbers. If this is denied them, their ruin is certain. Will they have this advantage of overwhelming numbers? Only if they are combined, but will they be? To learn this, we must go back to the battlefield of Gumbinnen, where Rennenkampf is still rejoicing in his victory. General von Prittwitz's decision to break off the battle and the movements ordered by his staff on the night of the 20th had been executed with extraordinary celerity. When night fell, 7 German divisions were in contact with Rennenkampf's army. When morning broke, they were nowhere to be seen. The 17th and 1st Reserve Corps are already 15 miles away to the southwest. François, with 3 divisions, is already in training 20 miles away, for the most part on the lengthy sidings towards Königsberg. The day is fine and warm, and the Russian chiefs, who the night before were far from sure where the advantage of the battle lay, gave themselves up to optimism and rejoicing. It was not until the 3rd day, the 23rd, that the ponderous mass of the First Army got itself again into motion and by leisurely marches rolled forward westward along the Baltic shore. One explanation can be offered for this. Many have been forthcoming. De Pierrefeu does not hesitate to accuse Rennenkampf of treachery. He uses the expression "sold to the enemy." He points to a second disaster later in the war, when Rennenkampf fell under suspicion so grave that he was removed from his command. We shall examine this charge further presently. Hoffmann can only suggest jealousy and personal spite. He recalls the old feud between Rennenkampf and Samsonov in the Manchurian War. But Zielinski has not been charged with treachery. Zielinski had had to quarrel with Samsonov. Zielinski was the immediate authority by whom both the army commanders were directed. It is Zielinski who is playing the hand. Why then did he acquiesce calmly, nay cordially, in Rennenkampf's delays, while at the same time he urged Samsonov ruthlessly forward? Obviously because he was deceived about the German fighting power. He had convinced himself that they could not withstand the double attack. Henceforward his aim was not merely their defeat, but their destruction, and this destruction could only be complete if Rennenkampf did not drive the Germans back before Samsonov was ready to cut them off. The reasoning was sound. It was the facts which were wrong. But anyhow, there can be no excuse for Rennenkampf's total loss of all contact with the enemy. However the strategic movements might be planned, it was vital to know where the Germans were. There were only 4 or 5 corps to be accounted for. Whatever was not in front of Rennenkampf might be moving to attack Samsonov and vice versa. Rennenkampf had no less than 5 cavalry divisions, 20,000 horsemen, none of whom had taken any serious part in the battle. They had only covered 48 miles in the previous 3 days, and their transport was complete. Reconnaissances of even 30 miles would have revealed during the 21st and 22nd at any rate the rearguards of the German 17th and 1st Reserve Corps. But Rennenkampf had lost the German army. He had no idea where they were or what they were going to do. He gladly assumed that the bulk had taken refuge inside the fortress of Königsberg and that the rest were hurrying back towards the Vistula. Even on the 26th, when a circle of steel and fire was about to close round Samsonov, Zielinski complacently ordered Rennenkampf to provide 2 corps for the investment of Königsberg and to march on with the rest towards the Vistula. In fact, Prittwitz's panic-stricken decision to break off the battle at Gumbinen had created a deception of the Russian mind which no ruse, however carefully planned, could have effected. Henceforward Samsonov will be left alone to face all the German forces in East Prussia and to engage his weary troops against an enemy incomparably superior in organization, communications, quality, and moral, who may now bring to the decision 180 battalions against his 150, and who possesses artillery half as strong again in numbers and double his weight in metal. In these circumstances, the great battle which followed could only have one result. During the 23rd, the 3 corps of Samsonov's center, the 13th, 15th, and 23rd, advancing northwest, began to come in contact with the reinforced German 20th Corps. Footnote: it had been joined by a Landwehr division and a fortress detachment equal to a brigade. That is, it was in all 3½ divisions. End of footnote. The 3 divisions which had been sent round by rail from Königsberg were not yet in position, and the 20th Corps, which had been facing south, partly by pressure, partly by design, gradually hinged back on its right through a quarter circle until 2 days later it faced east. It was as if a door had swung open invitingly. Into it the Russians marched. So far everything seemed to promise success. Samsonov was confident, Rennenkampf slothful, and Zielinski unperturbed. Only Samsonov's troops were exhausted and hungry. The battle of the 23rd between the Russian center and the 20th Corps was severe. All through the 24th and 25th, the Russians, despite their fatigue and privations, fought well, and their great numbers pressed heavily upon the slowly recoiling German front. By the night of the 25th, the 20th Corps had completed its backward wheel. One of the reinforcing divisions had come into line on its left. No further withdrawal could be allowed. Orders were given to fight it out to the death in the positions then occupied, and the battle of the 2 centers, 7 Russian divisions against 3½ German, was about to begin. The issue was awaited with deep anxiety at the German headquarters. A battle at odds of 2 to 1 against an enemy whose quality had not yet been put to the proof was in itself a grim event. Yet this battle was only won, and that not the crucial feature in the combination. Where was Rennenkampf, and what would he do? Although in the 4 days since the 20th his columns spread fan-wise have only advanced 15 miles, and that in a westerly direction, he has still the time to join his comrade on the battlefield. 3 days' marches, if unopposed, will bring him to Allenstein. His clouds of cavalry could already have been overrunning the narrowing region between the 2 Russian armies. What is there to stop him? The corps of Mackensen and Bülow, with the German cavalry division, though he does not know where they have gone, stand in his path. This powerful body, which the German accounts speak of as the Eastern Group, is probably capable of warding Rennenkampf off until the battle with Samsonov is over. But then its forces cannot take part in the battle themselves. They must be either engaged with Rennenkampf or awaiting his attack. Meanwhile, as they face north and east, the Russian 6th Army Corps, guarding Samsonov's right, will, as it advances by traversing their rear, and if Rennenkampf attacks, they will be taken between 2 fires, as well as fighting against double their numbers. So here is another possibility loaded with peril. All therefore depends on Rennenkampf. If even now he converges towards Samsonov by forced marches, the whole German army in East Prussia will be fighting simultaneously at odds of 2-1. What then will Rennenkampf do? It was this that tormented Ludendorff and his chief from the moment when, at 2:30 on the afternoon of August 23, they learned from Hoffmann the whole situation. To leave the Eastern Group as a shield against Rennenkampf was to avoid the gravest risks, but to reject all the prizes. On the other hand, to ignore Rennenkampf, to take the chance of his advancing and to bring them southward, offered first of all the certainty of striking the isolated Sixth Corps. Not 2 Russians to 1 German, but 2 Germans to 1 Russian, thus intervening in the most terrifying manner upon Samsonov's rear. On the night of the 24th, Hindenburg, on Ludendorff's resolve, ordered both Mackensen and Bülow to go south by enormous forced marches and strike the Sixth Corps. From the point of view of the High Command, says Hoffmann, the position that evening was the most difficult in the whole battle. Even now Ludendorff did not make up his mind finally, and who shall blame him, about Mackensen's corps. It should start south, but at any moment it might have to turn back and help the solitary German cavalry division in delaying the advance of Rennenkampf's mighty host. Still, the orders were given, and the whole Eastern Group was marching southwards throughout the 25th. At this moment the story of the crisis of Lemberg repeated itself in the astounding event which, coupled with Rennenkampf's inertia, has given rise to the accusations of foul treachery. The Russians had inadequate telegraph and signal arrangements, and all their communications were awkward and tardy. But as we know, they possessed their radio service. Their radio now, with bland simplicity, proclaimed to the world in 2 uncoded messages exactly what Rennenkampf and exactly what Samsonov would do or not do on the 25th and 26th. The German wireless station in the fortress of Königsberg listened to these amazing disclosures. In the early morning the first message told them that the Russian First Army would not reach the line Gerdauen-Allenburg-Wehlau until the 26th, thus making it certain that Rennenkampf's army could not take part in Samsonov's battles. In the afternoon the second message revealed all Samsonov's projected movements. It showed that he believed the rearward wheel of the 20th Corps was part of a general German retirement and that he had only to pursue. This was immensely reassuring. It showed that Samsonov's attack on the 20th Corps would probably not take place until the 26th. In addition to this, says Hoffmann dryly, the order confirmed the information we already had as to the strength of the Russian forces, and apart from this, we were very glad to know the exact objectives of the individual enemy corps. Thus fortune cast her mischievous foreknowing smile on General Ludendorff at this birth moment of his memorable career. When he arrived on the 23rd, as he believed, and as the world has long believed, to restore order out of chaos, to retrieve disaster and stem the rout, she had presented him with a splendid opportunity ready-made and requiring only his nod of approval. On the 25th, when he hung on the double tenterhooks of Rennenkampf's menace and Samsonov's impending battle with the German 20th Corps, she reassured him on both accounts. Rennenkampf may for 2 or 3 days be disregarded, so that all the troops of the German Eastern Group may fall upon Samsonov's right, and Samsonov himself will not attack seriously until the 26th. By which time the whole of the 8th Army, François on the right and Morgan's division deflected to the threatened left, will be in line. Nor need he fear a trap. The movements described by the intercepted radio can be checked by the ordinary contacts and reconnaissances of the field and are found generally to correspond. This is the way to make war. The German High Command passed the night of the 25th in comparative mental comfort. General von François, with his 1st Corps, supported by various detachments equal to another division, was rapidly arriving on the German right. In order to help the threatened 20th Corps in what was expected to be a hard-fought battle on the 26th, Ludendorff demanded that he should attack the Russian left at dawn. François protested vehemently. Only part of his fighting troops had detrained. Very little of his artillery and none of his ammunition columns had yet arrived. The task set him was severe. Samsonov had guarded his left flank by a new Russian army corps, the 1st, which was now entrenched upon the ridge of Ustau, and its left was prolonged almost to the Polish border by a guard division, a rifle brigade, and 2 cavalry divisions. François, in attacking the 1st Corps as directed, would have to expose first his left shoulder and finally his back to the rest. He wanted to find the true flank of the enemy and make a still wider turning movement. Convinced at length that for this there was neither the strength nor the time, he fell back on a more solid objection. He disliked frontal attacks. Anyhow, he would not make one without the fullest artillery preparation. Remember what happened to Mackensen last week at Gumbinnen. Ludendorff determined from the outset to assert the authority of the new command over a competent but notoriously unruly subordinate, curtly insisted. Hindenburg, who presided at this fierce discussion, maintained an august silence. So severe was the tension that he himself felt it necessary to visit François and enforce the orders with his whole personal weight. Under this pressure, François adopted a policy of passive resistance. He obeyed, but in such a manner as to make sure he had his own way. No one could say that he did not attack on the 26th, but in fact he so delayed his movements and restrained his troops that scarcely any progress was made. Indeed, to be blunt, he played with the army staff from dawn till dusk. That this was a calculated and deliberate frustration of their will, and not merely the slothfulness of reluctance, is proved by the fact that the wily François asked the 20th Corps on the night of the 25th whether they were really so hard-pressed that he must make an attack without artillery support and before he was ready, in order to save them. The 20th Corps replied reassuringly that they were all right, and that there was no need for him to compromise his preparations. Ludendorff passed the morning of the 26th in great impatience, but also in complete uncertainty as to what François was actually doing. It was not until the evening that he realized that he was being fooled. But by the evening other things had happened. The 2 corps of the Eastern Group had collided with the Russian 6th Corps, protecting Samsonov's right flank and rear. It was an encounter battle. The Russians had no apprehension of any serious danger. They thought that some portion of the retreating German army might be marching back parallel with, but at a considerable distance from them, while other retreating units would be following on behind them through Rastenburg. Samsonov's orders drew this picture for them. However, early in the morning of the 26th, the Russian 6th Corps received the unexpected news that an enemy brigade was at Lautern, and later that it was occupying Seeburg. Full of ardor, they attacked these forces with a division, and thus ran into the whole Eastern Group, 2 army corps and the 6th Landwehr Brigade, who were descending upon them from the north as fast as desperately determined men could march. The battle exploded immediately. The attacking Russian division found itself hopelessly outnumbered. It defended itself bravely till the evening. Its companion, countermarching to help it, was involved in its ruin. The Russian corps commander became demoralized. During the night and the next day the whole corps fled southwards, and its divisions did not stop till they reached Olszinen and Wallin, 21 and 25 miles respectively from the battlefield. The first of the blows which destroyed Samsonov had been struck. His right flank guard had been broken down, and this vital information was not imparted to him by the general concerned except in a confused manner and after a delay of many hours. During this momentous 26th, Francois' artillery had arrived, and he declared himself ready to attack at daybreak on the 27th. Hindenburg and Ludendorff proceeded to an eminence at the foot of Lake Gilgenburg, on which, amid fir trees, an aerial perch had been erected whence a clear view could be obtained. They were enormously cheered at 6 o'clock by the news that the Ustau position had already been stormed. This, however, proved to be false. The fighting troops had mistaken the village of Maischlitz, 2,000 yards to the southwest, for that of Ustau, and the real attack on the latter did not begin till 10 o'clock. This engagement, which some have called the Battle of Ustau, repeated upon the Russian left the disaster which the day before had befallen their right. The whole of Francois' artillery, strengthened by heavy guns withdrawn from the fortresses, opened terrific fire upon the Russian entrenchments facing west on the Ustau ridge. These entrenchments, hurriedly dug in continuous lines without traverses or covering rifle pits and thickly manned, were soon choked with dead and wounded, and the Russian corps, to whom the vital protection of the left flank of Samsonov's army had been confided, showed themselves unable to withstand the artillery storm. The division on the right, followed by that on the left, quitted their trenches before it was even necessary to launch the German infantry assault, and streamed back southward in considerable disorder by the way they had come, in the direction of Soldau. Thus, on 2 successive days, both the flanking corps which protected the advance of the Russian center had been routed, and for Samsonov, on the night of the 27th, only one flickering hope remained: immediate retreat. We will pass the night of the 27th at Samsonov's headquarters in the little town of Neidenburg. His right-hand corps, the 6th, has already been hurled back in shocking disorder by powerful forces which can only have come from Rennenkampf's front. His 1st Corps has run away from the Ustau position on his left. In the center, far in advance of these two faithless guardians, his valiant 15th Corps, with a division from the 23rd on its left, has been for 3 days in heavy action with the German center, and the 13th Corps, finding little opposition in front, has actually stretched forward as far as Allenstein. On both flanks throughout, and in the center, far advanced in danger's jaws, a doubtful battle and hideous lack of food. How did he react to these impressions? It is conceivable that an experienced commander would not by this time have realized the mortal peril which confronted his whole army. Immediate orders to the 13th, 15th, and 23rd Corps to retreat and to his flank corps to attack offered the only possible chance of escape. But a somber spirit of fatalism, characteristically Russian, seemed to have overpowered the doomed commander. He had been misled. He had supposed he had only a beaten foe to deal with. But the die had been cast. Fate must decide. Better perish than retreat. Perhaps there would be better news tomorrow. An awful psychic lethargy descended upon his weary being, and at midnight on the 27th, Samsonov ordered his center corps to continue their attack. But, as Hindenburg remarks, they were no longer seeing victory, but destruction. At dawn on the 28th, the whole German army counterattacked. The 20th Corps, reinforced on its left by the 3rd Reserve and Goltz's divisions, advanced in increasingly successful onslaught upon the Russian center. Mackensen, the 17th, and Bülow, the 1st Reserve, were moved westward with the double purpose of helping the 20th Corps and also reaching some position to defend the rear and flank against Rennenkampf, who had at last belatedly begun to appear. But the decisive action took place upon the German right, and here again there occurred one of François's grand disobediences. The 28th did not see Ludendorff at his best. He felt that the battle was won. He sought no decisive victory. Provided he was secure against an attack from Rennenkampf, he was ready to be content with small results. His orders to Mackensen and Bülow, repeated on the 29th, prevented these powerful forces from taking any very effective part in the battle, or from closing the wide gap which was open to the Russian retreat in the southeast. No one can blame him for taking precautions against Rennenkampf, but it is his orders on the 28th to François which have the worst appearance in the light of further knowledge. François, pursuing eastward with vigor all through the 28th, had entered Neidenburg by nightfall. He was ordered by Ludendorff to change his direction to almost due north and advance in the direction of Lana. Now, these orders implied the virtual abandonment of any serious attempt to round up the enormous masses of the Russian center. It moreover condemned François to plunging his corps into the forest area with the certainty that he would become dispersed, would not get far or do much. The order was sent in terms of exceptional impressiveness. It concluded with a solemn adjuration that the corps could render the greatest possible service to the army if these intentions were duly carried out. All depends on the First Corps. But General von François had quite different intentions. His advance troops were already halfway along the road from Neidenburg to Willenberg. This road running due east was in every way convenient for his purpose. It ran in open country within good rifle shot of the edge of the forest. Along this road, therefore, during the whole of the 29th, General von François hurried his troops, building up, as he went, a long line of posts and pickets to block in the Russian masses. By nightfall, François' line was completed. With 25 battalions, he had strung himself out over a length of 50 kilometers. By the night of the 29th, in spite of a further order to advance northeastward, he had this thin single line of posts between the Russian masses struggling to escape from the forests and whatever hostile troops might be set in motion against it from the direction of Warsaw. Again Ludendorff acquiesced in the decision imposed upon him by this audacious officer. We have now reached the last act of the tragedy. The British liaison officer in Russia, General Knox, had been attached to Samsonov's staff. In the morning of the 28th, he motored up from Neidenburg to join the commander-in-chief. He found him by the side of the road studying his maps, surrounded by his staff officers. Suddenly Samsonov rose, ordered his Cossack escort to provide horses for himself and his staff, and was about to ride off in the direction of the 15th Corps. General Knox prepared to mount and accompany him, but Samsonov took him aside. The situation, he said, was very critical. He did not know what was going to happen. He did not wish a foreign officer to accompany him. Even if the worst happened here, it would not affect the ultimate course of the war. With that he said goodbye and rode off. Knox adds that both he and his staff were calm. They said, "The enemy has luck one day. We will have luck another." Knox went back with a long train of motor vehicles and just got through Neidenburg in time. We may accompany General Samsonov a little further. He spent the night of the 28th with the headquarters of the 15th Corps. Throughout the 29th, the dissolution of the Russian center proceeded, and large masses of men in utmost confusion searched aimlessly about in the forest. At length the general and his 7 staff officers were alone. Night comes on. They dismount from their horses. They struggle eastward. The general, asthmatic, exhausted, broken-hearted, is supported by his officers. At last he can go no further. Murmuring to himself, "The emperor trusted me," he turns aside from the others. He is alone. 3 days before he had commanded 250,000 men. The officers hear a single shot. They search for his body. They never find it. They resume their journey, and some escape to tell the tale. The closing scenes continued during the 30th and 31st. All beaten armies tend to retreat along the path by which they have advanced. But as the Russians, whether as stragglers or in formed bodies, attempted to escape from the southern edge of the forest, they were met by the pitiless fire of François's cordon and driven back. Again and again, by day and night, the most desperate efforts were made to escape. Often bands of soldiers following the cross held aloft by a priest broke from the woods and rushed towards the German line. But none reached it. Says a German regimental history, "With morning grey, a long enemy column of all arms came slowly out of the woods without any protecting troops and offered a target which would never have been permitted at peace manoeuvres. Unfortunately, fire was opened on it too soon by some excited riflemen, upon which the general fire of both battalions and the machine-gun company was opened. This last was for the first time employed as a complete unit, and with all its 6 guns it opened continuous annihilating fire. A more fearful effect could hardly be imagined. The Russians tried to take refuge in the woods, abandoning vehicles and horses. The frightened and wounded animals rushed aimlessly over the country. Wagons were upset. There was soon wild chaos. The units which were still armed sought to take position on the edge of the woods, but very soon they exhibited white cloths on poles and rifles, showing that they regarded further advance as useless and wished to surrender. During the 31st they surrendered in enormous numbers. A single battalion of General von François's corps captured 17,000 prisoners. Large bodies of troops were seen from the air assembling in various open spaces, and alarm was caused at the German headquarters until it was realized that they were only prisoners and that the bayonet glints were only those of their German escort. The army command had no idea how many they had cut off in the forests. Hoffmann on the 30th put the number of 40,000, but Grünert was sure it did not exceed 20,000. Hoffmann offered to pay him a mark for every one under 20,000 if Grünert would pay a mark for every one above. Hoffmann expresses a well-founded regret that this wager was not accepted. In all, 92,000 unwounded Russian prisoners and 30,000 wounded Russians were collected by the victors. Of these 92,000, 60,000 were the well-earned prize of François's cause. By the evening of the 28th, Ludendorff was so satisfied that the victory was complete that he was already building up a line against Rennenkampf, whose cavalry divisions were now at last approaching Allenstein and could almost overlook the battlefields where their comrades had perished. It was to be their turn next. The glory of Tannenberg was during the war and for some years afterwards successfully appropriated by Ludendorff. It was the stepping stone by which he rose to the effective control of the whole German war. Hindenburg made no personal claims. He was content to allow Ludendorff's statement to pass unchallenged. It was as follows: General von Hindenburg has always agreed to my suggestions and gladly accepted the responsibility of consenting to them. But facts which are no longer in dispute prove, first, that all the movement which concentrated the Eighth Army against Samsonov had already been ordered by Prittwitz's staff on the initiative of Colonel Hoffmann, and these movements were approaching completion at the moment when Ludendorff arrived at the army headquarters. Secondly, that the only orders issued by Ludendorff en route, apart from those relating to minor reinforcements, were to withdraw the headquarters of the Eighth Army as far back as Marienburg and to authorize the various corps to act independently pending his arrival. Both these interventions were unfortunate and led to loss of precious time. During the course of the battle, Ludendorff on the 25th endeavored to force François into a premature attack, which, if checked, would have enabled Samsonov's army to escape before disaster overwhelmed him. François disobeyed him with magnificent results. On the 28th, Ludendorff resigned himself to the escape of the Russian center. In a fit of nerves, he prevented the 17th and 1st Reserve Corps from effectually closing the gap to the eastward, and on the same day ordered François to advance in a direction which undoubtedly would have enabled the mass of the Russians to escape to the southeast. In fact, Hindenburg, no doubt at Ludendorff's suggestion, telegraphed on the night of the 28th to the Supreme Command, "The battle is won. Pursuit will continue. The surrender of the two Russian corps may well not be achieved." But General von François disobeyed these instructions and, at great risk, yet truly measuring the quality of the enemy, ran out his cordon of posts and pickets along the Neidenburg-Willenberg road and thus entrapped the whole Russian center. The credit of the victory belongs, in large measure, to General Hoffmann, but its glory must forever be associated with General von François, who, though commanding only a single corps, acted with that rare alternation of prudence and audacity which is the characteristic of true soldierly genius, and who, upon his justly founded convictions, defied Ludendorff and gained for him a dazzling victory against his orders. That this opinion, harsh as it may seem to Ludendorff, has now been accepted in German military circles, may perhaps be inferred from the photograph of the Tannenberg decennial celebrations, in which François is accorded the place of honor, even Hindenburg himself, the President of the Republic, being proud to sit upon his right hand. The Battle of Tannenberg inaugurated the memorable partnership of Hindenburg and Ludendorff. Hindenburg, in loyal and courtly phrasing, has described it as a happy marriage. Ludendorff has given more definite and less graceful descriptions. It stands among the renowned associations of great captains in history. Nothing can rob it of its glamour. To avoid the constant repetition of these two names, which will occur so often in our story, it will be a convenience to express the combination by the Kabbalistic symbol HL.